We're a few days here before Elul, and the Kadmoinim gave us many simanim for Elul. That Elul is a notricon, Elul is an acronym. One of the most famous ones is Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, that a person's relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu depends on how much he puts himself out. Ani L'Doidi, if I am to my beloved, L'Doidi Li, then my beloved will be to me. If a person puts like shade, if a person puts out one finger, you get one finger of shade. If a person puts out a hand, you get a whole hand of shade. The more we give ourselves over to the Borei Olam, our hearts, our minds, our entire being, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give himself kaviyachol over to us. And that's Ani L'Dodi B'Dodi Li. But there's another less well-known acronym for Elul, and that's Es Levavcha Ves Levav Zarecha. Right? Your heart and the hearts of your children. And the Kadmonim are referring to the Orlis Alev. The Orlis Alev is the thick, thick klipa, the thick peel that exists on our hearts, the barrier which stops us from perceiving HaKadosh Baruch Hu's goodness in the world. And that's the Orlis Alev. And it's incumbent upon every single one of us, men, women, and children alike, to circumcise our hearts daily, circumcise our hearts to remove the Orlis Halev, to remove the Orlis Halev from our hearts. And it's not an easy process, right? By a bris milah, a knife is capable of taking off the Orlis Halev, but by a person's heart, it's much more difficult because we're talking about the inner chambers of a person's essence, and it's not so easy to get in there. Even with laparoscopic technology, it's not so easy to get into a person's heart. That's on one level. But even more difficult is than Es Levavcha, is Levav Zarecha, the heart of our children. We might feel, and properly so, that it's really, really hard to be in touch with our children in this generation. Right? We live in a world which is changing so radically every single moment. It's so difficult to be in touch with our children, to understand the way they see the world, to understand the way they perceive things. And while it's difficult for us to circumcise our own hearts, certainly it's difficult for us to guide our children to circumcise their hearts. So, what hope is there? What hope is there um, under these circumstances when the world is changing so radically? So, I believe this is what the Kadmona meant, that Elul, Es Levavcha, Ves Levav Zarecha. A person who is Makayim, Ani L'Doidi, V'Doidi Li, the more that we give ourselves over to the Borei Olam, and the more we recognize our fragility and our smallness in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every single area, whether it be Shalom Bayis, whether it be our health, whether it be our Parnasa, whether it be our Chinuch. The more we give ourselves over to the Borei Olam, and we recognize that it's just not in our power, right? We might try over and over and over again to try to guide our children in a certain direction, and it just doesn't go. At that moment, at that very moment, is Anila Doidili. The more you give yourself completely over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and recognize that absolutely nothing is in my power, and certainly being mechanech my children in such a generation is not in my power, the more you're Anila Doidili, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't worry about it. I'll take care about it. I'll give them siyata d'shmaya. I'll find the people that they listen to. I'll find the word. I'll put the words into your mouth that will go into your children's hearts. Perhaps someone give you a book at the Kosel, and you'll give it to your children, and it'll make an impact on them. Who knows who the shliach is going to be? But the moment a person recognizes Ani l'doidi v'doidi li, to be completely and totally given over to the Borei Olam and recognize that absolutely nothing is in our power. The only thing which is really in our power is Ani L'Doidi, right? And once it's Ani L'Doidi, once a person recognizes that he's totally given over to the Borei Olam, Ben V'Dodili, then a Kadosh Baruch Hu will shower our lives with bracha in Shalom Bayis, in Parnasa, in Chinuch, in health, right? But the first step is Ani L'Doidi, right? And it's difficult. During the whole year, it's very, very difficult. But as we get closer and closer to Elul, it becomes easier, as it were, because we see. And I just like to quote you something from this new sefer I just got, Lavushi Ois, from my Rebbe of Israel Orbach. And he says a beautiful idea here in the end of the sefer. He says like this. He's talking here about the avoda of Elul, and he writes like this. He says, "Ulai ze avoda shel kol Elul lehechen as hatzmeinu leos b'matzav shel skarvus v'sromos ksas b'shas tkiya shofar." Maybe, suggests Rav Israel Orbach, the entire avoda of Elul is to prepare ourselves for those moments of tkiya shofar, right? Which b'avasenu arab and meitzlanu tkiya shofar nasa kamat k'mo tkiya shir. It's like listening to some music, right? That moment of uh, judgment in front of Hashem, that we're standing in front of Hashem by Tkiya Shofar. Perhaps, says Rav Israel Orbach, the entire avodas of Elul is to prepare ourselves for that moment. Right? I just want to conclude with a beautiful, beautiful idea from the Sfas Emes. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard from the Sfas Emes. He says like this. He asks a very powerful question. He says, how can you blow the shofar at that moment? That we're calling ourselves a din. It's almost like jumping off a cliff. It's almost like suicide that a person is mazmin the din on himself. We're not allowed to mazmin din on ourselves. So says the Sfas Emes that at that very moment that Hashem remembers us, right? Zachrenu, right? The very moment of Tkir Shofar, when we're judged, when Hashem's mind for a split second as the judgment takes place. He said, it's worth it to endure that incredibly difficult moment of judgment in order to be on Hashem's mind, as it were, for one split second, right? And this is what it's all about. Ani l'doidel v'loidili, complete escarvus to the Borei Olam. To get to that point at Tkiyah Shofar, when we're on Hashem's mind for that 1 second of complete escarvus and complete closeness to Hashem. And this is a prototype for us for an entire year. All year long, to be as close as possible to the Borei Olam, to be Ani l'doidi v'dodili, but especially during Elul. And the closer and closer we get to that Rosh Hashanah, to that moment of Tkiyah Shofar, where Hashem remembers us for a split second during the judgment. And as Rav Orbach is saying, that the entire Elul is to prepare us for that moment, to get closer and closer and closer to this meeting, as it were, with the King of Kings. So Kadosh Baruch Hu should help us with our children and our parnasa and our shalom bayis and our health. In all areas, Hashem should help us. And the key for Hashem helping us is Ani l'doidi v'dodili. The more you pull back, the more Hashem pulls in, right? As Chazal tell us, right? It's aser la'adam leilich dalam esbekum eskufa. It's aser for a person to walk with haughtiness and pride, because that pushes away its doiche rag l'shchina, right? The more it pushes away the rag l'shchina, the less Hashem will be in life. The more a person humbles himself, and a person humbles himself by turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for everything he needs, all the time. The more a person does that, the more a person will see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their life and experience Hashem. We should be zocheh to this bakar of Amen Kein Teratzon.